Hey friends, tonight we step into something raw, relentless, and undeniably real. The everyday grind of life in the Roman Empire. But forget the marble columns, the glint of golden laurel crowns, or the echo of applause in the Senate. You're not Caesar. You're not even close. Tonight you're simply you. Dropped straight into a world where sandals squish through sewage, crucifixion is just another government tool, and comfort is a concept reserved for statues. Before we dive in, give this video a like if you appreciate these journeys into the gritty side of history, and hit subscribe if you want more. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Our little campfire stretches far and wide. So grab a blanket, dim the lights, and maybe switch on a fan for that ancient breeze. We're heading into a different kind of empire tonight. Your eyes snap open to chaos. Chickens screeching, a baby wailing, neighbors arguing. Welcome to your morning symphony. You're in a Roman insula, an ancient apartment block. Picture a multi-story tinderbox slapped together with second-hand bricks and third-hand hope. If you live on a higher floor, congratulations, you're poorer and closer to structural collapse. Your room is the size of a broom closet, the walls sweat when it's hot and ice over when it's cold. There's no window, just a hole that welcomes pigeons, smoke, and regret. The mattress is a sack of straw and suspicious insects. Your blanket smells like it has stories, none of them pleasant. Furniture? You're lucky to have a stool. Decoration? Maybe a crack in the wall that looks vaguely like a god. Kitchen? Don't make me laugh. Cooking indoors is illegal. One rogue ember and the whole block could light up like a Saturnalia bonfire. Your worldly possessions include one clay cup, one fraying tunic, and a wooden comb if you're especially fancy. There's no toilet. Not in your room. Not in the building. Just a judgmental chamber pot in the corner waiting to be lugged down groaning staircases before sunrise. Be careful, those stairs are slippery. One wrong step and you're not just making a mess, you're becoming part of it. The walls are thinner than your tunic. You can hear everything, a neighbor mumbling prayers, another coughing like he's inventing tuberculosis, and two others, well, let's just say Roman walls are very open-minded. The air is a blend of smoke, mildew, and body odor aged like bad wine. Someone's baking bread downstairs, but unless you're invited, which you're not, don't even sniff too loud. Outside, vendors scream about figs, fish guts, and who knows what else, while a centurion barks orders like he's paid by the decibel. You haven't even left the building and you're already sweaty, itchy, and probably breathing in lead particles from the plumbing. Welcome to your Roman workday. You're not a gladiator, a hero, or a myth. You're just a name history forgot, trying not to die before breakfast. And there's still an entire day ahead of you. But first things first, you need to pee. Of course, your apartment has no bathroom. What it does have is humiliation. With chamber pot in hand and shame in your soul, you shuffle down the crowded street toward the latrina, Rome's version of a public toilet. Calling it public is generous. It's more like a community support group where nobody wears pants. You arrive at a long, cold bench with holes carved into it. Below it, a shallow stream trickles by, just enough water to drag away waste and dignity alike. You sit cautiously, praying your neighbor doesn't feel chatty. And as you stare into the wall ahead, pretending this is normal, you realize, this isn't ancient history anymore. This is your reality now. And the day is just getting started. Privacy? Forget it. The Roman latrina is as public as it gets. There are no doors, no stalls, just a stone bench with holes and too much eye contact. It's less a bathroom, more a social mixer with echoes. One man squatting and talking grain prices. Another's grumbling about his sciatica from the legions. Meanwhile, You're just trying to avoid locking eyes with the guy across from you who's casually eating olives like it's a picnic. He doesn't blink. And then comes the tersorium. Ah yes, the crown jewel of Roman hygiene, a communal sponge on a stick, soaking in a bucket of vinegar or salt water. The idea is that it's rinsed before use. The reality? That sponge has seen battles no soldier would survive. You wipe with hesitation, praying the vinegar gods were merciful. If you're lucky, you've got your own rag. If you're rich, maybe some moss. But odds are, you're using what dozens of others used. And now you carry not just the memory, but the deep, quiet shame of shared sanitation. Don't even think about skipping this awkward ritual and relieving yourself in an alley. Rome has public urination laws. The fines are real. And Roman enforcers don't do warnings, they do whips. Done? Great. Time to wash up. Except, you won't. There's no soap. No running water. Just a grimy communal basin that's touched more fingers than a handshake competition. You splash your hands, feel no cleaner, and exit the latrina feeling physically lighter and spiritually defeated. Welcome to Rome. Now it's time for breakfast, or what they call breakfast. You've survived the morning gauntlet, avoided slipping into the gutter, and made it past Roman law enforcement. Bravo. But now you face ientaculum, the Roman breakfast. A ceremonial nod to nutrition before a full day of heat, labor, and despair. The menu? A depressing duet, stale bread and diluted wine. If fortune smiles, maybe a scrap of cheese or a few wrinkled olives. Mostly, though, it's just chewy disappointment in solid and liquid form. There's no coffee. Rome never heard of it. No fried eggs, no sizzling bacon, no oat milk flat whites. This isn't a brunch. It's survival with carbs. Your bread is panis rusticus, a rugged brick of flour, grit, and sadness. Chew it too fast and you'll chip a tooth. Soak it in watered-down wine, and it turns into soggy cardboard. Still you eat. Because not eating means working hungry, and working hungry means fainting in a gutter. There's no kitchen in your home, so you squat by a fountain, gnawing alongside others who look equally betrayed by life. If you've got a drizzle of olive oil or a spoon of garum, Rome's infamous fermented fish sauce, you've upgraded from dull to distressing. Now your breath smells like low tide. Wealthy Romans might enjoy fruit or honey. But you're somewhere between barely making it and please don't steal my tunic. You're just rich enough to avoid slavery, and just poor enough to envy someone's broken jug of goat milk. Sometimes food vendors stroll past, peddling hot chickpea fritters or honey-soaked pastries. You hear them, you see them, and you ache. But your coin purse is emptier than a senator's promise. So you nibble your stone bread and whisper lies to your stomach. It's cake. It's definitely cake. This is how the day begins. With crumbs, dehydration, and the knowledge that you'll soon walk 7 dusty miles in worn sandals, your belly echoing with regret and your head buzzing with leftover wine fumes. And no, it doesn't get better. Now it's time to work. Because unless you're a senator, a spoiled poet with a wealthy patron, or miraculously inherited your uncle's vineyard, you are part of Rome's grinding machine. And that machine runs on sweat. You could be a porter, a potter, a bricklayer, a cart pusher, or, if your karma's truly cursed, a sewer cleaner. Whatever it is, you're not sitting pretty. You're standing, hauling, bending, and sweating from dawn to dusk. And this is only the beginning. Rome demands a lot. Streets, aqueducts, monuments, bathhouses, and all of it has to be built by someone. That someone? You. Armed with nothing but your own limbs, a pickaxe older than your father, and sandals with less support than a wet sponge. The Roman workday begins at a time when even the sun hits snooze. But your foreman? He's already up, hollering Latin curses and flailing a stick like he's conducting a very angry orchestra. If you're late, forget being scolded, you'll be fined, humiliated, or replaced. And being replaced in Rome usually means starvation, but with dignity. Your tools are laughably primitive. A splintery shovel that gives you splinters and back pain. Bricks stacked on your spine like offerings to the gods. Water hauled from a cistern that smells like wet sandals and broken dreams. No gloves. No helmets. Just dust, danger, and the knowledge that one wrong step could turn your spine into spaghetti. Skilled labor? It's no easier. If you're a potter, cobbler, or cloth seller, you're locked in daily combat with dozens of others peddling the same wares. Undercutting is brutal. And even if your work is perfect, a wealthier Roman might still reject it because your nose looks too ambitious. Think elite jobs are better? Think again. Whether you're a messenger darting through chaos with scrolls tucked under one arm, an accountant tallying figures for a master who forgets your name, or a teacher trying to explain grammar to a mini-emperor in sandals, your day is a storm of stress. Women? They're juggling survival. Spinning, weaving, haggling in the forum, raising kids, managing a household, and trying not to die during childbirth. Ancient multitasking at its most hardcore. If the gods smile upon you, you get a lunch break. A short one. Assuming your overseer isn't trying to look tough in front of a visiting bureaucrat. Welcome to Rome, work or perish trying. The empire may be eternal, but your lower back is not. You've survived the morning. No bruises, no lash marks. Great. Now it's time to walk through a Roman street. That is, if you consider dodging carts and animal poop walking. These roads were genius-level engineering, sabotaged by what's on them. It's noon. The city buzzes like a beehive filled with chaos. Not metaphorically. Literally. There are bees. Alongside rats, flies, goats, stray dogs, screaming vendors, multilingual beggars, feral children, and pickpockets disguised as helpful grandsons. Imagine Times Square if it smelled like fish guts and half the crowd was carrying poultry. Let's talk roads. Roman roads were straight, strong, and slick with everything unholy: wine spills, urine, donkey droppings, old stew, and mysterious substances you don't ask about. The center of the street acts as an open sewer. Step off the sidewalk without watching your feet and, voila, you've christened your sandal in misery. Carts? They don't stop. They don't slow down. Legally, most aren't even allowed during the day, so they race through at night like caffeinated gladiators with wagon wheels. And you? You just better not be in the way. If the carts don't get you, the elbows will. Or the baskets. Or the furious fish vendor screaming about eels that went bad in the sun. And the air? A fragrant bouquet of smoke, incense, public toilets, roasted meat, and the occasional decomposing dog that someone thoughtfully draped a toga over before walking away. Let's not forget the impromptu madness. Street fights. Spontaneous protests. Parade of some forgettable official blocking your route while a brass band tries, and fails, to play in tune. The Roman street doesn't just breathe. It snarls. Trip on a fig, collide with a runaway mule cart, offend the wrong monkey, and your day ends faster than Caesar on the Ides of March. And all you wanted was to buy some lentils. You're sticky with sweat, caked in dust, and praying for something cold to touch your skin. Luckily, you live in Rome, a city famed for its aqueducts, those majestic veins of stone that carry mountain fresh water into the belly of the empire. Unluckily, that miracle of engineering wasn't built with you in mind. Unless you're wealthy enough to live in a domus with a personal fountain, your experience of Roman water is communal, in the most chaotic sense of the word. Your local supply is shared with thousands of others, each coughing, sneezing, rinsing, stomping, and occasionally baptizing a child out of either love or desperation. You queue at the public fountains, where water is collected, feet are soaked, and toddlers are dunked like olives. Hygiene? More like wishful thinking in liquid form. If you want an actual bath, your best bet is the thermae, public bathhouses, Rome's pride and joy. They're grand, widespread, and in theory civilized. In reality, you'll be lounging in lukewarm soup with a dozen men who've never met a towel. No soap. No chlorine. Just a shared soak and shared secrets. The atmosphere? A blend of political debates, naked ambition, and someone trying to sell you sandals while another picks his ears with a twig. And that water? It's not new. It's seen everyone. You leave feeling marinated, not cleaned, bathed in bacteria with a splash of stale eucalyptus oil. And let's not forget the lead pipes. Yes, the same brilliant engineers who built aqueducts also lined their plumbing with sweet, brain-melting lead. Because while Romans conquered the known world, chemistry remained a mystery. Over time, this liquid luxury delivered a host of symptoms: exhaustion, infertility, gout, and madness. Rome wasn't just falling, it was slowly poisoning itself. Want something safer to drink? Wine. Always wine. In fact, the poorer you are, the more suspicious you are of water. Contamination from latrines and runoffs is rampant in the slums. So wine, watered down but slightly fermented, becomes the go-to beverage for men, women, and yes, even kids. Because when society's rotting from the aqueducts up, a gentle buzz is better than a violent illness. Sure, Rome brought running water to its people before most of the world knew what plumbing was. But for the average Roman? Every drink, every rinse, every hopeful toe dip is a gamble. Praise the aqueducts, just don't trust them. Welcome to the Roman Empire, where pain isn't a punishment. It's the standard setting of life. Stub your toe? No ice, no Advil. Just grit your teeth and limp onward until it either heals wrong or falls off. Break a bone. Wrap it in whatever rag isn't already filthy and pray. Splinter in your foot? That's not an inconvenience. That's how infections begin, and how you might end. Rome wasn't built for comfort. There are no padded chairs. No ergonomic tools. No concept of take the day off. If you're a laborer, you're hauling bricks with a hernia and a half-whispered prayer. If you're a soldier, you're marching 20 miles a day and blistered feet with a scorpion bite for company. If you're a woman in labor, good luck. Your midwife might chant. That's the extent of medical care. Every inch of your body is one stubbed toe, one misstep, one poorly cut loaf of bread away from becoming a cautionary tale. And unless you live near a temple where a particularly motivated priest likes dabbling in herbal smokes and mystery poultices, your options are simple. Smear on some homemade ointment, or ignore it until either you heal, or you're carried out. Anesthesia? What's that? Surgery is performed while you scream into a stick. Dislocated joint? It's popped back in by a guy named Marcus who once saw someone else do it and thought, yeah, I can wing that. Dental care? Picture a blacksmith. Now imagine that blacksmith approaching your mouth with tongs. That's dentistry. Even the wealthiest Romans didn't shy away from pain. They embraced it like a badge of honor. Stoicism wasn't just trendy, it was a lifestyle. To suffer in silence was to be noble. Complain about a broken arm? That wasn't just weakness, it was spiritual failure. A true Roman would grit their teeth, nod stoically, and maybe compose an epic about the agony later. So yes, pain wasn't optional. It was expected. It arrived without warning, stayed too long, and rarely came with pity. Speaking of which, let's say you actually seek help. What happens when you visit a Roman doctor? You're injured. Maybe it's that angry blister from yesterday's labor. Or maybe you shaved with a dull bronze blade and now your chin resembles a battlefield. Either way, it's time for medical assistance, though in Rome, that's less healthcare and more extreme endurance challenge. Let's review the system. Roman medicine was a spicy stew of Greek philosophy, mysticism, and sheer guesswork, sprinkled with a lot of herbs and hope. At its core? The four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Feeling sick? Clearly, your fluids are out of tune. Time to drain something. Your doctor, who might also moonlight as your barber or fishmonger, reaches instinctively for leeches or a blade. Because bloodletting is the go-to solution for anything from headaches to heartbreak. Got a cough? Let's open a vein. Feeling low? Time to bleed out some of that gloom. Surgery? Oh, it's a thing. Roman doctors had scalpels, forceps, even bone drills. What they didn't have was anesthesia. So you stay wide awake, clutching a splintery table while a man in a stained toga pokes into your body with the swagger of someone who once skimmed a scroll on anatomy. Antiseptics? Optional. They might rinse your wound with wine or vinegar. Helpful, but it burns like divine wrath. Infections were common. Death even more so. And the prescriptions? Wildly unpredictable. You could be handed a concoction of honey, garlic, crushed insects, or a balm made from ash, herbs, and very particular animal dung. If nothing works, your best bet is to sleep in a temple, whisper to the gods, and hope you dream up a cure. If you don't recover, your doctor simply shrugs, your family lights a ceremonial candle, and the neighbors start speculating whether your death means bad omens for the harvest. It's not that Romans didn't care about medicine. They just hadn't quite mastered the difference between what healed and what killed you slower. So next time you sneeze, be grateful for antibiotics, and the fact that modern healing doesn't start with blood loss. After a day spent sweating, bleeding, and dodging donkey carts, your stomach is ready to revolt. Time for dinner. Or as Romans called it, cena. But don't expect warm comfort food. Let's talk about what's not on your rustic table. No pizza. No pasta. No tomatoes, potatoes, sugar, chocolate, or coffee. Those hadn't been invented, discovered, or traded yet. This isn't Italian cuisine, it's Roman-era survival food. You sit down to a wooden bowl of something. It's brown. It's steaming. It's probably pulse, a porridge made of grains, beans, or lentils. It tastes like damp gravel with the faintest whisper of herbs, on a good day. On a bad day, it's just the gravel. Protein? Only if you hunted it, trapped it, or fished it from a nearby stream. Meat was rare and costly. And even when you managed to get some, there was a strong chance it was already halfway to becoming a health hazard. Bon appetit, ancient Rome style. Roman cooking didn't come with refrigerators, so preservation meant drowning your food in salt, smoke, or garum, a fermented fish sauce that smells like the bottom of the sea, after something's died in it. And stayed there. Thinking about it is enough to make your stomach reconsider its life choices. On special days, you might get something boiled, vegetables so overcooked they weep, or maybe a hunk of hard cheese and a lonely figure. The rich? They dine like the gods, if the gods had no taste buds. Roasted flamingo, stuffed dormice, jellyfish marinated in vinegar. It's less about flavor and more about shouting, I'm richer than you, and I prove it by eating the weirdest creatures I can find. Wine? Always watered down. Drinking it pure? That's barbaric. But don't relax just yet. The water it's mixed with might be the same water someone washed their tunic in this morning. So really, you're just choosing your method of intestinal betrayal. Dessert? Maybe a handful of nuts, some dried fruit, or maybe nothing at all. Perhaps it's a religious festival and you're fasting in honor of a god who disapproves of dessert. Either way, no one's bringing you tiramisu. Napkins? That's adorable. You wipe your hands on a communal cloth that's seen more hands than a street performer, or just smear your greasy palms on your tunic and pretend it was clean to begin with. By the end of the meal, your belly is full but uncertain, and your breath? A potent mix of garlic, sour wine, and existential dread. Still you ate. Now, the sun's going down, and you might think it's time to unwind. But don't expect peace. Night in Rome doesn't mean quiet, it means chaos with the drumbeat. After a full day of sweat, toil, and questionable fish sauce, you're probably longing for something that makes you forget you live above a sewer. Good news, you're in Rome, a city that offers entertainment everywhere. Bad news? Let's start with the headliner, the Colosseum. A breathtaking marvel of architecture built for the sole purpose of watching people die more dramatically. Gladiators fight for survival. Criminals are devoured by wild animals. And on special occasions, they flood the arena for full-scale naval reenactments, complete with drowning. It's all free. Because if citizens are screaming for blood, they're not complaining about taxes. You're crammed onto a stone bench, sweating beside strangers, cheering while a man loses a limb in glorious slow motion. The blood, the sand, the cheers, Rome's way of saying, "Look how civilized we are." Want something less stabby? Try the amphitheater. There you'll find Roman plays. Perhaps a tragedy, beautifully written in high Latin that no one really understands, or a comedy where someone pretends to seduce Jupiter using a sausage. Yes, that's the joke. Subtlety is not a Roman virtue. If you're into speed and violence, the Circus Maximus is your arena. Chariot races that are fast, loud, and frequently fatal. No helmets. No safety rails. Just raw horsepower and certain destruction. Crashes happen. Limbs fly. Bets are made. Fights break out. And if you cheer for the wrong team, you might not make it home. But here's the brilliance. Behind the gore and spectacle, Rome is distracting you. Not just entertaining, but hypnotizing, dazzling its people into forgetting the pain, the poverty, and the plague-ridden alleyways. This wasn't entertainment. It was anesthesia. And if the shows don't numb you, don't worry. There's always more wine. But let's shift gears. Time to explore Roman justice. Spoiler alert, it's not warm and fuzzy. You've survived a hard day's labor, eaten your fishy dinner, and watched a man be publicly disemboweled for sport. You might think, surely now, I can relax. Surely the law protects people like me. Oh, sweet summer Roman. That's cute. Roman law doesn't protect. It looms. It reminds you that you're replaceable, small, and only useful while you're alive, and quiet. Mercy isn't a right. It's a statue. First of all, your legal status in Rome is everything. If you're a citizen, you technically have rights. In theory, you can't be flogged in public, unless someone with a fancy title gets irritated. Then you get a trial, followed by the flogging. But if you're not a citizen, justice is faster and far less polite. You might find yourself beaten, branded, or executed by lunchtime. And if you're a slave, you're not even a person. You're property. If one slave kills their master, regardless of how terrible that master was, every slave in the household can be put to death. Not because they were involved, but because Rome wants to send a clear message. Don't even think about rebellion. If you're accused of a crime, don't expect calm legal proceedings or your own toga-clad lawyer. Trials are public performances. Wealth buys drama, witnesses, bribes, and sweeping hand gestures. All you bring is your tunic and a creeping sense of doom. Tears help. So does having powerful patrons. Otherwise, your fate depends on the mood of a sleep-deprived magistrate, and whatever the gods whispered to him in a dream. Punishment in Rome wasn't just about discipline. It was theater. A thief might be branded or have their hands crushed. A liar? Tongue pierced like a kebab. Commit fraud, and you might be flogged, banished, or, if you're lucky, just publicly humiliated. Insult the emperor? There's no prison sentence, just death. Usually in some creative, terrifying way meant to be remembered. Some crimes are punished in public, with crowds cheering like it's a festival. Crucifixion is a favorite, slow, painful, humiliating. It's not reserved for saints. It's standard for traitors, highway robbers, and anyone the state feels like making an example of. Law enforcement? Don't count on them. Rome's vigiles act as firefighters, night guards, and occasional peacekeepers. But they're underpaid, overworked, and usually corrupt. Get robbed? They might shrug. Bribe them? They might help you rob someone else. Sure, Rome had laws, etched in stone, recited in public, but they served the powerful, not the fair. Now let's talk gods. Because you're not just obeying emperors, you're living on Jupiter's turf. After braving the streets and surviving Roman justice, maybe you're hoping for spiritual comfort. A quiet moment of reflection, perhaps? Sorry, not in Rome. Religion isn't private, it's a full-time obligation wrapped in smoke, sacrifice, and ceremonial deadlines. You don't pick your gods. They come baked into your birth, your job, your neighborhood. And there are so many. A god for everything: door hinges, cardea, toilets, cloacina, property lines, terminus, mildew, robigus. Walk 10 steps and you're face to face with another shrine. Ignore it? Bad idea. You're not just being rude, you're asking for disaster. Roof collapses? Must have skipped the Saturnalia ritual. Religious festivals are constant. Dozens fill the year. On those days, all work stops. Bulls are slaughtered. Fires burn. The air smells like barbecue and wet stone. You show up to honor the gods, but mostly out of fear. Because if you forget an offering, the gods don't just frown. They respond, with drought, plague, or a suspiciously tragic grain shortage that spoils everyone's lentils. Let's talk about one of Rome's more demanding traditions, emperor worship. The state doesn't just want your obedience, it wants your reverence. You're expected to honor the emperor not just as a leader, but as a divine being in a toga. That means burning incense at his altar, chanting his virtues with forced cheer, and whatever you do, do not roll your eyes during one of his triumphal parades. That's about one raised brow away from treason. If you're caught skipping out on public rituals, say you're a little too quiet during the Vestalia, or you accidentally forget to toss grain into the temple flame, you risk being labeled impious, atheistic, or worse, suspicious. And in Rome, suspicion is like open wounds in a pool of sharks. Belong to a foreign cult? Keep it quiet. Unless it's officially sanctioned by the Senate, read, profitable in taxes, wine, or military recruits, it's frowned upon. Rome doesn't really care what you believe. It cares how you perform. Religion isn't about faith, it's about precise rituals, punctual offerings, and public participation. Feelings? Optional. Punctual goat sacrifice? Mandatory. Smile as you do it. And while we're on the topic of public performances, let's now scale the slippery, blood-slicked ladder of Roman ambition. You've bowed to gods, dodged a lawsuit, and survived a bathhouse without catching something mythological. Now comes the hardest part: social climbing in a society built like a hierarchy wrapped in barbed wire. Every smile, nod, or flick of your sandal is either helping or hurting your position. Rome is a ladder all right, greased with politics and lined with knives. At the top, you've got the senators, old money elites with purple striped togas and country estates that require their own census district. Below them, the equestrians, Rome's moneyed class of entrepreneurs and horse-owning elites. Then come the plebeians, average citizens like you, clawing your way through life. Below that? Freed slaves, actual slaves, foreigners, and the poor soul who once made a joke about Augustus's nose. Want to climb? You'll need a patron. A powerful protector who offers opportunity in exchange for lifelong groveling. It's like having a boss, a landlord, and a low-key dictator rolled into one, always charming, always watching. Each morning, you attend the salutatio, the client's ritual visit. You line up, flatter his beard, compliment his oddly dressed son, then ask for a favor, a loan, a meal, a job, or just a bit of public attention. If the gods smile on you, he might flip you a coin, or offer the honor of carrying his litter through the forum like the proud pack mule you've become. Congratulations. You're officially connected. But the performance doesn't end there. Everything matters. Your clothes must be spotless, not stylish, just not stained. Your Latin must be clean. Your friends chosen carefully. And whatever you do, don't act too ambitious. That terrifies people. If you rise too fast, the same people who toasted your success will be slipping knives into your back, figuratively, and maybe literally. In Rome, networking is a contact sport. Gossip is the real currency. Say the wrong thing at a banquet, and your career's over. Marry the right person, and you just bought your family another generation of safety. But love? That's a poet's problem. Everyone else marries for power, land, or access to exclusive temple seating. And don't get comfortable, even if you make it to the top. One failed harvest, one missed religious rite, one enemy whispering in the right ear, and it's over. You won't even hear the dagger slide in. Now the sun begins to sink behind the tiled rooftops of Rome. Surely, things calm down after dark? Not in this city. As dusk settles, you tell yourself, maybe now I can rest. But Roman nightfall isn't peaceful, it's just a costume change. The chaos doesn't stop. It just slips into something darker. Let's begin with the lights, or rather, the lack of them. Unless you're wealthy enough to burn oil through the night, and most aren't, darkness owns the city. People navigate by moonlight, muscle memory, and pure desperation. The winding alleys of Rome are a black maze. You stumble? No one's helping you up. They might help themselves to your shoes. Rome's vigiles, the supposed guardians of the night, are charged with preventing fires, catching criminals, and keeping order. In reality, they're overworked, underpaid, and more familiar with naps than heroism. Some are brave. Most prefer bribes. All are badly outnumbered. And criminals know it. The shadows belong to thieves, pickpockets, and the occasional ex-gladiator looking for trouble. If you're walking alone, you are the trouble. Doesn't matter if you're noble or nameless, unless you're armed, fast, or invisible, you're a target. But if bandits don't get you, fire might. Rome's towering insulae, those charming stacked wooden apartments, are basically kindling with doors. Cooking after dark is technically banned, but hunger doesn't obey curfews. One dropped lamp and an entire neighborhood can vanish in flame. Take the Great Fire of 64 C. It didn't start itself, but once it did, it roared through the city like an angry god. You might think you're safe, until you smell smoke at midnight and realize there's no plan. No exits. Just stairs collapsing beneath your feet as you flee with your tunic, your chamber pot, and whatever dignity you haven't scorched. And if the fire stays away, the noise won't. Rome doesn't sleep. It rants. It sings. It howls. Drunken parties echo off the walls, priestly parades stomp by with tambourines and chanting, And if some senator's lover is having a meltdown, 3 blocks will hear every tear. Sleep isn't a right, it's a gamble. Peace? Reserved for the rich, the armed, and the lucky. Morning is almost here. You just have to survive another night. Then do it again. Because when the sun sets over Rome, the chaos doesn't stop, it evolves. It slinks into darker corners. It gets teeth. The city doesn't rest. It hunts. Let's return to Rome's greatest fear, fire. Those multi-story tinderboxes called insulae, where most people live. They're built from timber, clay, and wishful thinking. One spark, and it's an inferno. And the firefighting force? The vigilas again. Half firefighters, half street cops, all exhausted. Their gear? Buckets, basic tools, and a lot of shouting. If your building catches fire, you might get lucky. Or you might become tomorrow's cautionary tale. Then there are the night hunters, thieves, street gangs, wandering cutthroats. They move through the alleys like shadows with ambition. Rome doesn't light its streets. Torches are pricey. You walk by touch and gut instinct, and you pray your gut's right. Rule 1. Don't carry anything flashy. Rule 2. Don't stare. Rule 3. Never, ever get between 2 drunk gladiators arguing over a sandal. And drunk they are. Rome's taverns spill into the streets after sunset. Wine flows like floodwater. Songs are shouted, dice are thrown, poetry is slurred. Fights are inevitable. So is blood. Sometimes a noble, full of rage and vintage wine, sends his slave to settle a score with fists and whips. You hug the shadows and pretend you saw nothing. Women walking alone? Don't. Rome isn't kind to the unaccompanied. After dark, the streets belong to the desperate, the reckless, and the dangerously bored. And the city itself? It watches. It listens. It waits. Always hungry for the next story whispered by moonlight. Trying to sleep in ancient Rome? Good luck. Your insula groans like it's rehearsing its own collapse. Rats whisper through the walls like plotting thieves. Your neighbor coughs, a dry, wheezing rasp somewhere between a dying goat and a haunted accordion. Somewhere beyond the thin walls, someone is screaming. It could be passion. It could be murder. Realistically, it's both. You bury your face in a warm, damp pillow and whisper a desperate plea to Mercury for silence. But silence is a luxury Rome doesn't sell. The empire doesn't sleep, it just changes volume. Because even in darkness, Rome is loud. And when the pale light of dawn scrapes over the rooftops, it begins again. You'll rise from a creaking bed in a crumbling tenement. You'll survive public toilets, dodge chariot traffic, and squint through the fog of gladiator gore, street riots, lead-lace plumbing, leeches, religious noise, smoking rooftops, and half-boiled lentils seasoned with despair and fermented fish juice. You'll bow to gods you don't believe in, follow laws that don't care about you, and fall asleep to a background track of rats and political riots, and wake up to a fresh one. You're dirty, sore, possibly poisoned, and spiritually wounded by the communal sponge. And it's only been one day. Modern humans, used to filtered air, painkillers, and groceries that arrive in under 10 minutes, wouldn't last past lunch. You'd abandon hope halfway through your second serving of garum-drenched sadness. And yet, the Romans didn't just endure this, they thrived in it. That's the maddening brilliance of Rome. Beneath the grime and madness, the empire worked. They carved roads through mountains, summoned water from hillsides, filled libraries, crowned temples, and staged theater beneath marble domes. They built aqueducts that still stand. They mapped stars. They passed laws. They performed surgeries with bronze knives and stubborn hope. And they invented concrete, some of which still holds up better than buildings finished last year. They shaped the world for 2,000 years. Latin became the bones of a dozen modern languages. Their arches and columns shaped churches, capitals, and college quads. Their politics, senates, vetoes, and citizen rights echo through modern democracies. But this wasn't built with silk and silver. For the average Roman, those without estates, titles, or heated baths, life was a slow, grinding war against the day. And yet they pressed forward. Because they had to. Rome wasn't made of gold. It was built from fear, fire, muscle, ambition, and a whole lot of dirt. It was built layer by layer, life by life, century by bloody century. And that's why it lasted. Let's be honest, you'd beg to go back to the land of warm showers and phone chargers before noon. You'd sell your whole coin pouch for a glass of filtered water and a chair with lumbar support. And that's okay. You don't need to survive ancient Rome. Maybe even admire it. Because someone, somewhere, once walked those same rat-infested alleys, and helped build the empire that paved the road to this very moment. So you could sit here today. Clean. Safe. And mildly traumatized. Now imagine being a princess of Parthia in the 2nd century. You've got royal blood, a name fit for legend, Rodigan. And you don't live in a fairy tale palace. You live in the shadow of rebellion, raised with swords, suspicion, and the constant awareness that your dates might be poisoned. Rodigan wasn't born into luxury. She was born into survival, into a world of horses, politics, and uncertainty. Her father, Mithridates too, wasn't some idle figurehead. He was a conqueror. The man who took Parthia from a dusty frontier to a growing empire that would one day clash with Rome itself. But expansion has a price: rebellions, and irritated neighbors who suddenly find themselves under your banners and behind your borders. Because empires never grow quietly. They grow like storms, loud, wild, and always leaving someone else in the rubble. As a young noblewoman, Rodigan came of age not with lullabies and embroidery hoops, but amid tense diplomatic meetings, sand-drawn battle plans, and scribes scrambling to track shifting alliances like a game of royal chess. Her education wasn't limited to silk, etiquette, or flattery. She absorbed the art of governance, the presence of command, and how to wear a breastplate without it clashing with her jewelry. To understand her rise, you need to understand the place of Parthian women. Though often kept behind veils, literal or political, they were no strangers to power. Some governed cities. Others orchestrated dynasties like composers of human symphonies. And a rare few, like Rodigan, carved out legends, not by who they married, but by who they overthrew. And overthrow she did. But let's not jump ahead. At this stage, Rodigan was already more than a princess. She was a living banner for Parthian pride, an emblem of bloodline, legacy, and an unspoken expectation: either marry a king, or become one in spirit. Rodigan never seemed the type to lounge in perfume while provinces fell apart. While other noblewomen were soaked in rose oil, she was likely buried in reports about troop logistics, or grain shortages. She had no patience for vanity. Fate, as always, had plans. And soon she'd make a vow that involved not washing her hair until a rebellion was crushed. Spoiler, that hair got very, very dusty. But before we crown her with glory, we need to understand what kind of uprising would be foolish enough to provoke a warrior princess who'd rather wear armor than gold. The Parthian Empire looked impressive on a map, a glittering patchwork stretching from the Persian Gulf to Mesopotamia's fringes. But beneath the marble was mostly string and stubborn hope. Its unity depended on shaky marriages, fragile promises, and the occasional sword resting meaningfully against someone's neck. So when a rebellion broke out in the western territories, probably in Media or Babylonia, it wasn't shocking. What was shocking was their audacity. These weren't just unpaid tax farmers. These were aristocrats and governors, local powerhouses tired of taking orders from the capital. Perhaps they thought the throne was distracted. Perhaps they knew no male heir stood ready with an army. They didn't just grumble. They seized forts, silenced messengers, sent the crown a message that basically read, "Polish your own sandals." Normally, this would trigger the usual royal response: dispatch a cousin with more ambition than strategy and let him figure it out. But this time? This time was different. Historians still debate why: bad timing, poor logistics, or sheer royal fury, but Rodigan took command. Personally. Not in the comfortable approve the reports from a silk cushion way, but in the mount a horse and ride into smoke way. She donned armor. She made a public vow that would echo through history: she would not wash, comb, or otherwise tend to her hair until the rebellion was defeated. Dramatic? Absolutely. Inconvenient? Especially for court hairdressers. But this vow wasn't about theatrics. It was a living, breathing declaration, a statement that her honor was chained to the Empire's survival. Every time someone saw her tangled, dusty hair, it screamed one message: this fight isn't finished. And it worked. Soldiers didn't just see a royal figurehead. They saw a commander sacrificing vanity for victory. They followed her not out of duty, but devotion. She wasn't just leading them. She was with them, frayed, fierce, and entirely unforgettable. She didn't wear a crown. She wore grit. Rodigan wasn't a princess wrapped in silk. She was a daughter of the Parthian frontier, molded by wind, thorns, and war dust. Her resilience wasn't born in a palace. It was forged in saddle leather and cold steel. And the rebels? They had no idea what was galloping toward them. They prepared for a general, maybe a silver-tongued negotiator. Instead, they got an unwashed storm on horseback, a woman with steel in her eyes, no patience for protocol, and even less for conditioner. And she meant business. When Rodigan left the capital, there was no royal parade, no petals falling at her feet. What she had was cavalry, conviction, and the quiet pressure of an empire on the edge. The rebels needed crushing, and she looked ready to do it with her bare hands. Gone were the trappings of nobility. Her infamous hair, wild and unbothered, had begun to unravel like a prophecy. It whipped around her face like a battle standard, tangled and soaked in sweat, dirt, and defiance. In a world obsessed with appearances, she made hers into a weapon. The campaign wasn't swift. This wasn't a ceremonial siege solved with coin and catapults. The rebel cities were confident, well-fortified, cocky. They'd expected hesitation, not a blood-dusted woman galloping through the haze with nothing but momentum and menace. But Rodigan didn't falter. Her instincts were battlefield sharp, perhaps sharper than most of the men who'd worn command before her. She wielded classic Parthian tactics like a surgeon wields a blade: precise, calculated, lethal. Feigned retreats, rapid raids, vanishing cavalry that dissolved into dust and returned like ghosts from an unexpected angle. She wasn't just leading the fight, she was the fight. And her soldiers? They didn't just follow her because of her name. They followed her because she bled with them. She didn't command from a distant tent. She rode in front, armor dented, nails dirt-streaked, helmet crooked with sweat and fury. As the days dragged into weeks and then months, so too did her hair, long, knotted, battle-bound. By the third month, her strands were ropes, twisted with dust, tangled with whispers of battle prayers, and stained with the sweat of sleepless nights. And it made her terrifying. The rebels gave her a name, the Witch Queen. Not because she wielded magic, but because surely something unholy had to explain a noblewoman who fought like a berserker and hadn't bathed since the first skirmish. This wasn't natural. It was too persistent, too ruthless, too Rodigan. But there was nothing supernatural about her. Just discipline. Brutal, relentless, unbending. By the time her army surrounded the final rebel city, her legend had galloped faster than any messenger. In drinking halls and military camps alike, the joke wasn't about Parthian swords, it was about whether Rodigan would ever wash again. And truth be told, no one was certain she would. The final rebel stronghold rose before her like a smug fortress. A walled city, reinforced and stuffed with confidence. Archers watched from parapets. Supplies had been stockpiled. The rebel leaders hunkered down, convinced they could wait her out. They believed they could outlast her. Bad call. By now, Rodigan had become myth. Rumors flew faster than arrows. Some said her hair had turned to iron. Others whispered she hadn't slept in weeks, that her eyes glowed with madness. The legends stacked higher than siege ladders. But she wasn't a ghost story. She was real. And she had a plan. Instead of charging in swords raised, Rodigan chose patience. Precision. She laid siege not with fire, but with time. She choked trade routes. Intercepted messengers. Poisoned wells. The rebels had braced for blade and fury. Instead, they got hunger. She starved them. She let their strength drain from within while she waited outside, camped in the dirt beside her men, never higher, never cleaner, never softer. Just another figure among the canvas tents. No jeweled throne, no silken pavilion. Rodigan ate what her soldiers ate, gritty bread that scraped the throat and wine that tasted like disappointment. She checked their armor herself. She rode night patrols. She stayed dirty, stubbornly so. Despite every chance, she refused to touch a comb. Her vow had become sacred. No one joked about it, not even the bold ones. It wasn't superstition. It was shared conviction. Her tangled hair had become a banner, a living reminder that their hardships weren't wasted. Every knot was a testament, we're still standing. Inside the rebel stronghold, morale began to rot. They had hoped to outlast their enemies, to exhaust them. Instead, it was their own will that began to crumble. Arguments erupted between their leaders. Food dwindled. Whispers of desertion spread like hairline fractures through a temple wall. Then came the break. A small gate, unguarded for an hour, maybe through exhaustion, maybe betrayal, was discovered by one of Rodigan's scouts. That night, under cover of wind and shadow, her troops slipped through, silent as the grave, and flung open the city gates from within. By dawn, it was over. The city had fallen. And Rodigan, caked in ash and sweat, stood atop the battlements, unwashed, unyielding, and utterly unforgettable. There was no fanfare. No golden procession. Her victory was not declared with horns, but with water. After months of grit, blood, and sleepless nights, she stood before her army not in velvet robes, but in the same dented armor she'd worn since the first skirmish. Her face was marked by sun and battle, and her hair, filthy, matted, feral, fell like a curtain of legend down her back. But it was done. Every rebel outpost conquered. Every traitor brought to heel. Her oath fulfilled. Now, and only now, could she do what no one in the Empire had dared urge her to rush. She could wash her hair. According to tradition, passed down through fireside tales and oral history, she didn't summon her attendants to a palace chamber. She chose a courtyard, public, open, raw. She wanted the soldiers who bled beside her to see the vow break with their own eyes. Basins were filled. Oils were warmed. Combs, untouched for months, were brought out like sacred weapons. Under the blue sky, Rodigan, grimed in war and glory, began to scrub the rebellion from her scalp. It wasn't just cleansing. It was ritual. Every tangle undone was a province reclaimed. Every rinse of water became a baptism, of peace, of return, of renewal. As the water hit the earth, it carried with it the memory of blood and victory. Some say she wept. Others say she smiled. But what all stories agree on is the silence. Dozens of battle-hardened soldiers watching, breath held, still as statues. She emerged transformed. No crown adorned her head. She didn't need one. The dust was her diadem. Her refusal to wash had become more powerful than any jewel. In that moment, Pathia didn't just have a princess. It had a myth. She could have returned to the court in triumph, let bards sing her name and nobles fall over themselves in praise. But she lingered. Stayed in the field a little longer. Ate with her warriors. Heard their stories. Walked among them not as a symbol, but as their own. She knew her legend was only beginning. But she didn't want it sculpted in marble or polished in gold. She wanted it etched in the hearts of those who'd remember. Not for the empire she saved, but for the dust she wore to do it. After the infamous hair washing that became the stuff of legend, Rodigan could have ridden straight to the capital with trumpets, banners, and enough royal theatrics to fuel a century of songs. But she didn't. Instead, she took the long road home, on purpose. She moved slowly, city by city, returning not as a conqueror in gold but as a sentinel. She walked the streets she had reclaimed, inspected walls still healing from siege, and looked into the faces of citizens to ensure that rebellion wasn't hiding in the ashes. It wasn't for show. It was strategy. Rodigan understood the most dangerous moment in any campaign isn't the battle, it's the silence afterward. Victory breeds complacency. Empires don't fall from defeat alone. They rot from within when they forget why they fought in the first place. She wanted everyone, loyalist or rebel, to know that Parthian's strength wasn't built on cavalry and coin. It was in her bones. In the grime still caked under her nails. In the decision to choose effort over ease, discipline over decadence. And because of that, people didn't just respect her, they followed her. Crowds gathered not to kneel before a polished royal, but to witness the legend herself, dusty, tired, unperfumed, and unmistakably real. She didn't bring fear. She brought accountability. She asked tough questions, listened to grievances, and paid for provisions out of her own war chest. She rewarded loyalty. And for those who repented? She offered clemency, but never without caution. By the time she returned to the royal court, her name had already outpaced her horse. The story of her return moved faster than a messenger's breath. Scribes scrambled to document her feats. Artists argued over how to immortalize her, wild-haired and worn, or radiant and reborn. Ministers whispered nervously. A woman had led armies, kept promises, and now stood in the capital with half the provinces pledged to her, not the throne. What do you do with a princess more beloved than most kings? Some urged marriage, as if a wedding ring could bind her power. Others suggested giving her command of the border permanently, where she could be both useful and safely distant. But Rodigan didn't clamor for titles. She didn't scheme in hallways or hover over scrolls of land grants. She had nothing left to prove. The battlefield had been her coronation. The dirt her crown. Her name was already etched into the hearts of soldiers and citizens alike. No inscription needed. She didn't need gold to be crowned. History had already done it. In the months that followed, she didn't chase fame, but it chased her. She became myth, music, marble. Poets adored her. Children imitated her. Soldiers toasted her name by firelight. Every returning veteran had a Rodigan story, and every tale made her larger, harder to challenge, impossible to ignore. And yet, at court, where gossip slithered like perfume behind silk, she said little. No speeches. No boasts. No requests. Just silence. She listened. She watched. She waited. Because the battlefield had simply changed, from dust and stone to shadows and whispers. Even the king, her father or brother, depending on which tangled thread of Parthian succession you followed, stepped lightly in her presence. Rodigan wasn't admired for charm. She wasn't beloved for beauty. She was respected for what few men could rival: command. She had turned her vow into policy, her grime into legend. And now her silence? That was just another weapon, wielded with precision. She didn't tell anyone what came next. Maybe because no one needed to know. Maybe because she didn't know herself. For the first time in years, she was still. No battles to lead. No rebellions to crush. No orders to shout through smoke. Just stillness, and that stillness unnerved people. What does a woman who wins without a crown do next? Some historians believe Rodigan used the silence like a blade, sharp, controlled, deliberate. Her mere presence in the palace halls made ministers second-guess their proposals. One raised eyebrow could stall legislation. A thoughtful pause from her could alter the course of a campaign. She had discovered a new kind of power, one that didn't need volume. She didn't speak often, but when she did, the walls listened. Silence wasn't absence. It was command. She moved like a shadow wrapped in memory, her hair freshly washed and braided with gold and legacy. Her presence alone was a quiet rebellion. She had proven that the force of Pathia didn't have to march in boots. It could stride in silence, in tangled hair and steel resolve. She didn't have to lift the sword anymore. She had become one. And so, she waited. Because sometimes, the most powerful move is to remain still, unmoved, unreadable, unforgettable. But as the years drifted by, the Empire's scribes began doing what scribes often do, rewriting stories to suit kings. Rodigan, once a firebrand of legend, was gently erased. Her name softened in records. Her victories attributed to others. The silence she once wielded like a weapon was now used to bury her. No marble mausoleum was built in her honor. No gold-leafed epic etched her face into official scrolls. But legends don't need permission to endure. In dusty outposts, her name lingered like a charm. In villages she spared from the sword, parents told stories of the uncombed princess who bent empires with a promise. Not fairy tales, but warnings about what happens when you underestimate a woman with purpose. Soldiers recited her battlefield decisions like scripture. Rebels muttered her name like a ghost, unsure if she was legend, or waiting for her next ride through the dust, hair wild like banners in a storm. There's something deeply unsettling about someone who breaks all the rules and still wins. Rodigan didn't spend her youth painting flowers or plucking harps. She didn't master the art of quiet obedience. She carved her era in fire, then vanished into its smoke. Some say she retired to a peaceful life, away from politics. Others believe she stayed hidden in the halls of power, whispering into the ears of kings behind closed doors. A few romantics claimed she rode one last campaign across the borderlands, and never returned, not because she was defeated, but because she had no more to prove. The truth? No one knows. But what's certain is this. Rodigan's legacy lived not in stone, but in people. She never wore a crown. She didn't need one. Her leadership didn't rest on gemstones, but on grit. She taught her people that a vow, however strange, could bind tighter than any royal edict. She showed them that loyalty wasn't born in courtrooms but in the dust and silence between battles. So while the official histories gave her barely a footnote, the soil of Pathia still remembers. Because immortality doesn't always come from statues. Sometimes it comes from keeping your word, and winning. Centuries later, Rodigan's story lives on like a whispered secret. Not shouted from marble balconies, but passed between those who understand power that doesn't need permission. No statue bears her face. No golden tomb sings her name. But in the minds of those who value rebellion, endurance, and unshakable purpose, she is immortal. Not remembered like a king. Remembered like a storm. She didn't conquer new lands. She didn't broker famous treaties. She shattered expectations. In an age when women were told to stay hidden while men wrote history in blood, Rodigan tore the veil aside, walked into the fire, barefoot, helmet under her arm, and led. She didn't ask for power. She claimed it. And the empire didn't fall. It followed. More than her victories, Rodigan left behind something rarer, an example. A lesson no scroll or decree could ever enforce, that true loyalty isn't carved from fear. It's forged beside the fire. It grows when people see their leader struggle in the same dust, under the same sky, refusing ease when they could demand it. It's born from watching someone choose integrity over indulgence, discipline over comfort. It's watching someone keep a vow so absurdly long, it becomes sacred. Rodigan wasn't perfect. No real legend ever is. But her story endures because it was tangled, raw, and real, like her unwashed hair on that final day, caked with sweat and dust, woven with stubborn pride. In that dirt, there was dignity. In that vow, there was a new kind of power, one greater than any crown. When her soldiers looked at her, they didn't see a princess in silk. They saw someone who believed in the cause more than in vanity, more than safety. And that's the kind of leader history never manages to erase. Even now, long after Parthia's bones have turned to dust, her name surfaces like smoke in moments of defiance. Artists breathe her back to life. Writers chase her shadow. All for a vow that began as a challenge and became a symbol. A vow to not wash until the fight was won. To some, it still sounds ridiculous. But to anyone who's clawed their way through injustice, it makes perfect sense. Rodigan was never about shine, she was about substance. It was the dust, not the gold, that crowned her. Dust, the very thing emperors fear as their final fate. She wore it like honor. The thing kings avoid, she embraced. And when the chroniclers forgot her, when monarchs dismissed her, it didn't matter. Because the dust remembered. And that's where legends live, not in monuments, but in the soil. Before the empires clashed, before blood turned plains to red, there was another woman, one born not in marble but in motion. Her name was Tomius, daughter of the wind. Raised in the open arms of the steppe. Her homeland wasn't paved or poetic, it was harsh, vast, and alive with freedom. She came from the world of the Masajte, fierce nomads whose horses galloped like shadows and whose lives were stitched with honor, survival, and steel. We know little of Tomius as a child, but we can hear the rhythm of it. She likely learned to ride before she could walk, to shoot before she could speak in full sentences. In her tribe, girls didn't hide in tents. They trained beside boys, rode with warriors, and bled into the dust without complaint. To lead was to bleed. And even as a young woman, she did both. Her people worshipped the sky and sun. They ate from herds they raised, and buried their dead with blades in hand, ready to fight beyond the grave. They had no palaces. No temples of gold. But they had pride. And when strangers crossed the mountains, they met them not with prayers, but with arrows. Tomius likely rose after the death of her husband, a leader before her. But what matters is not what she inherited. It's what she took. She didn't wait to be chosen. She stood, seized command, and dared to speak like a sovereign in a world where women were rarely allowed to whisper. And when kings refused to listen, she made them. Tomius was no mere queen. She was Shahut, Steppe's checkmate. A war chieftain clad in bronze and leather, whose voice carried across plains like thunder, and whose army rode as if born from the wind. But power never arrives without cost, especially not for a woman. As she solidified her rule, the whispers grew. Across the southern mountains, another name stirred, Cyrus the Great. The king who devoured nations. The man who wanted more. And the wind, once wild and unchallenged, now met a coming storm. The stage was set. The steppe winds screamed across the open plains, and Tamaris, daughter of warriors, was about to ride straight into legend. While she ruled the boundless southern grasslands with grit and clarity, a different force was rising in the distance, calculated, methodical, imperial. Cyrus the Great, the formidable founder of the Achaemenid Empire, had already subdued Lydia in the west and conquered Babylon to the south. His banners waved over deserts, snow-capped mountains, and cities where tongues changed with the terrain. But Cyrus was never one to settle. He was an architect of empires, and every architect eventually looks toward the next unclaimed horizon. To him, the Massagetæ weren't just riders of the wind, they were an obstacle with potential. They didn't boast grand cities or golden temples. But they controlled the northeastern frontier, the gateway to new lands, new riches, and crucial trade arteries. More than anything, they possessed something far more dangerous than wealth: pride. And Cyrus believed pride could be reshaped, or shattered. Still, he didn't draw his sword right away. Cyrus had built his legend on more than brute strength. He was a tactician, a diplomat, a master of veiled ambition. And so he tried a time-worn strategy, one that had silenced foes without spilling blood. He proposed marriage. According to ancient accounts, chief among them, Herodotus, Cyrus sent emissaries to Tamaris offering not just alliance, but matrimony. On parchment it looked noble, a royal bond between the mighty Persian king and the indomitable queen of the steppe. But Tamaris wasn't fooled. She saw the offer for what it was, a velvet-wrapped attempt at conquest. This wasn't love, it was annexation by ceremony. She said no, and that single word echoed like thunder in Persepolis. With diplomacy shattered, Cyrus returned to the language he spoke best: war. He ordered his legions to cross the Araxes River, the jagged line that separated his empire from hers. If Tamaris would not surrender her realm, he would take it. But the queen of the steppe had already begun her counterplay. She knew her land like blood knows its vein. She knew how her warriors fought, swift, unrelenting, mounted like lightning across the plains. And she knew something else: Cyrus wasn't just after land. He was after a woman who dared to defy him. He had no idea what storm he just summoned. Cyrus the Great, world tamer, city taker, had outwitted kings and conquered kingdoms. To him, the Massagetæ were just agile nomads with little to defend. But he was charging headfirst into the wrath of someone just as clever, and far more furious. Tamaris had warned him. After rejecting his proposal, she sent a message sharp as iron: cross the Araxes, and you'll regret it. Cyrus crossed anyway. He constructed a floating bridge of boats, and marched his forces across the river into Massagetæ territory. But instead of meeting him in open combat, Tamaris vanished, pulling her forces back, deeper into the steppe. The Persians soon came across an abandoned camp. Food still warm. Wine flowing freely. A rare delicacy for a nomadic people. It looked like panic. It smelled like victory. It was bait. And Cyrus took it. He left part of his army in the camp under the command of General Harpagus, his most trusted lieutenant. Then, as night blanketed the plains, the Massagetæ returned like shadows reborn, swift, silent, and savage. They descended upon the drunken Persian troops with calculated fury. The clash was short, brutal, final. Among the fallen was Spargopizes, Tamaris' son, a commander of her armies and pride of her bloodline. What happened next is cloaked in contradiction. Some accounts claim he was captured alive. Others say he was too proud to be paraded. Either way, the outcome was the same. Upon realizing his fate, Spargapises chose death. He took his own life. And the storm was only just beginning. Some say he died in the fighting. Others claim he was captured first. But all versions agree. When word of his death reached Tomius, something inside her cracked, then reforged into iron. Her grief was volcanic. But her rage? That became the stuff of legend. She sent a final message to Cyrus, not a warning, but a vow. You thirst for blood, she wrote, and I will see you drown in it. She promised to turn the plains red. Promised that her vengeance would be louder than drums, longer than songs. Cyrus had taken her son. He had broken her land. Now he would meet not just a queen, but a mother with nothing left to lose, and she would be the last face he ever saw. This wasn't war. It was judgment. The sun climbed over the steppe like a drawn blade, sharp and merciless. And there stood Tomius, not just as ruler, but as storm and fury incarnate. Her warriors, toughened by years of nomadic survival, painted their faces with ash and battle rage. This wasn't about territory. This wasn't even about vengeance anymore. This was about blood. Cyrus, with all his glory, had underestimated the Massagetæ. He thought they'd break like the others, scattered, desperate, undisciplined. But Tomius had grown up in the saddle. She didn't just understand war. She lived it. She gathered her fighters for a full-on assault, not defensive, not delayed. It was all or nothing now. And she gave everything. The final battle, lost to maps and memory, took place somewhere deep in the ocean of grass. But the earth remembers. Because when Tomius struck, it wasn't a battle, it was a reckoning. Her cavalry rolled across the plains like a tidal wave of steel. Arrows rained from horseback. Axes rose and fell. Spears met flesh. And these were not warriors fighting for glory, they were people fighting with grief in their lungs and fire in their bones. The Persians, elite and seasoned, were caught off guard by the sheer discipline of their fury. They had expected chaos. They got precision. And Tomius was no distant commander. She rode beside her soldiers, blade in hand, blood on her armor, vengeance in her eyes. Every slash carried the weight of a mother's scream. Every charge echoed her son's final breath. Cyrus tried to hold the line. But it buckled. Then it broke. Persian forces collapsed. Some died where they stood. Others tried to flee, into the grasslands, into the horizon, but the Massagetæ followed. And hunted. And Cyrus the Great, the man who had taken Babylon, Lydia, and most of the known world, fell. Some say he was cut down in the chaos. Others say he was captured, then executed in silence. Either way, he died not in victory, but on her terms. And what followed would burn itself into legend. Herodotus writes that Tomius found Cyrus's body on the field. She ordered his head removed. Then, in a final gesture of brutal poetry, she filled a wineskin with blood and plunged his head into it. "Drink your fill," she said, "of the blood you craved so deeply." Was it true? Was it metaphor? Both? It didn't matter. Because the message was eternal, Tomius could not be conquered. When the dust settled and the grasses drank their fill of empire's blood, it was she who remained, standing, breathing, victorious. A queen who had done what no king, no general, no army before her could. She brought Cyrus the Great to his knees. And then erased him. News of the defeat echoed across the world. The mighty Achaemenid Empire, thought unstoppable, had been shattered by a woman from the wild. The Persians tried to cover it. But the wound was too deep. Cyrus's body was eventually returned, interred with honor in the tomb at Pasargadae. Yet no ceremony could erase the sting of that final humiliation. His conquests were many, his power unmatched. But it was Ptolemus who wrote his ending. And history, despite every effort to forget her, still remembers the hand that closed the book. For Tomarus and the Massagetæ, the victory was more than revenge, it was a proclamation. A fierce reminder that their sovereignty wasn't just defended with swords and arrows, but with unwavering dignity. Tomarus hadn't merely resisted the might of the world's most powerful ruler, she had outwitted him, outlasted him, and crushed him. And then, just as suddenly as she had emerged from the windswept plains, she vanished from the pages of history. No records remained to detail her final days, her death, or whatever decisions followed her triumph. It was as if, after settling her score, Tomarus rode off into the endless horizon and let the winds of the steppe carry her legend where history could not follow. In the centuries that followed, chroniclers, poets, and philosophers tried to fill in the silence. They reimagined her, reshaped her, and turned her into something more than human. To the Persians, her name lingered like a bitter aftertaste. To the Greeks, she was a paradox, called a barbarian, yet more regal than many of their kings. To the people of Central Asia, she became something even greater, myth. A spectral queen galloping across the steppe, sword gleaming, memory intact. Across cultures and across ages, her image transformed. Medieval manuscripts painted her in shining armor. Renaissance artists rendered her towering over the corpse of Cyrus, serene and unstoppable. She became what each age needed her to be, an avenging mother, a queen of wild justice, a warning to the arrogant, and an icon of womanly might. But behind the myth, one truth held steady: she changed the course of history. Tomarus didn't inherit power. She forged it, battle-scarred and smoke-covered. And for one unforgettable moment, the Queen of the Open Plains proved that not all empires rise. Some crumble beneath the hooves of vengeance. What little we know about her doesn't come from Massagetæ records. They left behind no scrolls or carved tablets. Instead, we know her through the words of Herodotus, the so-called father of history, writing nearly a century later. In his histories, he cast Tomarus as both warrior and thunderstorm, a queen whose grief became fire and whose justice turned imperial arrogance to ash. But Herodotus wasn't a historian in the modern sense. He was part scribe, part storyteller. His version of Tomarus was a tale as much as a truth, a morality play for Greek audiences about the dangers of hubris. To Herodotus, Tomarus was a cosmic reversal. Cyrus the Great, who had conquered cities and crushed kings, fell not to a larger army or superior strategy, but to a grieving mother who fought not for conquest, but for her son. Her victory became legend. Her vengeance poetic. According to Herodotus, she had Cyrus's head severed, dropped it into a wineskin filled with blood, and declared, "Drink your fill." But was it real? Modern scholars argue endlessly. Some believe Herodotus exaggerated or even invented key moments, using Tomarus to personify the downfall of Persian pride, especially during a time when Persia still loomed over the Greek world. Others argue that while details like the blood wineskin may be symbolic, the heart of the story, Cyrus dying in battle against the Massagetæ, likely happened. There's also the matter of perspective. Herodotus, like many Greek writers, filtered foreign cultures through a Greek lens. To him, the Massagetæ were wild yet honorable, noble savages painted in contrast to the civilized world. Tomarus, in his telling, wasn't merely a barbarian. She was a force of nature. She became the moral counterweight to Persian ambition, unyielding and unforgettable. Even if the details blurred with time, Herodotus succeeded in one thing: he ensured Ptolemus would never disappear into history's shadows. Because of him, she rose beyond the dusty margins of forgotten battles. She stepped into legend, where facts soften, but impact sharpens. In that space between myth and memory, her story found something close to immortality. In a world ruled by kings and gilded conquerors, Herodotus preserved a different kind of monarch, a queen who refused to kneel, who left her enemies bleeding in the dust and rode on. She may have slain one of the ancient world's greatest emperors, but Ptolemaeus never ruled an empire. She didn't build cities of stone or issue golden edicts etched with her name. Her people, the Massagetæ, were nomads. They didn't need walls. They followed the sun, the grass, the rhythms of horse and wind. And so her legacy was never carved into marble or preserved in imperial records. No coins bore her face. No statues proclaimed her rule. Instead, she lived on where steppe stories live, around campfires, in war songs, and in the breath of warriors whispering her name as they rode into battle. The Massagetæ were one among many fierce tribes that thundered across Central Asia. Their kin included the Saka, the Dahi, the Scythians, all expert horse archers who moved like wind between the Caspian shores and the distant frontiers of ancient China. Empires feared them. Not for numbers, but for speed. Not for armies, but for unpredictability. And for their refusal to fight like anyone else. A female leader among them was rare, but not unheard of. Unlike the patriarchal cities of the West, the steppe didn't cage its women in shadows. They rode. They hunted. They fought. They ruled. The earth itself bears witness. Scythian burial mounds have revealed warrior women buried with weapons, armor, and horse tack, proof that the tales were real. Ptolemaeus didn't break that tradition. She embodied its peak. Her power didn't come from bloodline or temples. It came from respect. From grit. From the undeniable weight of someone who could unite warring clans and ride through fire without flinching. She was a strategist, a diplomat, a warlord. In a world where survival came down to drawing first, and never blinking, she rose above them all. But because the Massagetæ built no palaces, her memory drifts, part legend, part echo. No monument holds her likeness. No scrolls tell her whole tale. She became something else, a phantom queen, stitched into the songs of her people, spoken of in windswept whispers and remembered in the rhythm of hooves. To Persian chroniclers she was a warning. To the Greeks a marvel. And to her people? She was memory turned to marrow, carried in blood, bone, and the battle songs still sung beneath open skies. A ghost who never vanished. A queen who still rides. Empires are etched in stone, but the steppe speaks in wind, and through it, Thamyris rose. Fierce, grieving, and undefeated, she became its voice. Centuries would pass. The great empires that once surrounded the Massagetæ rose like mountains, and crumbled into dust. The heirs of Cyrus built Persepolis, battled Alexander the Great, and eventually faded into forgotten pages. But her name endured, not in marble courts or royal annals, but in the hearts of those who refused to kneel. Across the vast plains of Central Asia, she became more than a queen. She became the echo of defiance. A symbol of female willpower. A spirit of the unbroken land itself. In many ways, Thamyris was not tied to geography. She wasn't Roman, Greek, or Persian. And because she belonged to no empire, no flag, no temple, her story belonged to everyone. Or to no one. That made her dangerous. And unforgettable. In the Islamic medieval world, chroniclers wrote her name in new tongues, but they never erased it. Some praised her as a just avenger, a sovereign with righteous fury. Others depicted her as a terrifying barbarian queen, a reminder that when power rests in a woman's hands, it can be just as glorious, and just as deadly. When the Renaissance came, European artists rediscovered her through Herodotus's tales. And what they saw thrilled them. Paintings showed her clad in armor, triumphant above the corpse of the man who once ruled the known world. In one vivid scene, she holds Cyrus's severed head high like a bloodied standard, part vengeance, part warning. Yes, it was theatrical. But it was also a statement. These artists weren't just painting history, they were painting rebellion. A woman who didn't just survive the world of kings, she conquered it. By the 19th and 20th centuries, Tomiris had become a national heroine across Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, reborn through poems, lessons, and statues. Educators reimagined her as the mother of a proud people. Military parades marched in her name. She rode again, not in battle, but in collective memory. In culture. In identity. Once she rode with a bow across the wild steppe. Now she charged forward through myth and pride. And in a world that still wrestles with the idea of power in a woman's hands, Tomiris remains a living challenge. She was not soft, nor saintly. She was not meant for taming. She was sharp-edged, ruthless when needed, and kind only when earned. She was resistance wrapped in flesh. And the blood of empire on her hands? It was not a stain, it was her crown. History often celebrates those who leave behind palaces, monuments, and scrolls. It remembers kings who carved their names into mountains, who ruled through decree and dynasty. Tomiris did none of that. She left behind no marble temple, no empire to trace in stone, no royal insignia to puzzle over. But her name lives on, not because she built, but because she endured. Not because she reigned forever, but because she refused to be erased. And that, too, is a kind of immortality. She stands as a defiant contradiction to the way history so often remembers women, not as background figures or supporting roles, but as forces of will, of consequence, of destiny. Tomiris didn't wait for permission to be remembered. She carved her place with fire and fury. She didn't follow behind a king. She rode against one, and she won. Her story is now told in classrooms stretching from Central Asia to the heart of Europe. Not simply because she defeated Cyrus the Great, but because she dared to challenge him at all. She didn't fight to preserve an empire. She fought to protect freedom. A wild kind of freedom, one that galloped on horseback, hunted with falcons, slept beneath stars, and laughed at the idea of borders. A freedom you couldn't sketch onto a map. You could only feel it in the earth, in the wind, in the blood. Today, her statues rise in the capitals of Kazakhstan. Her image graces coins, her name etched into textbooks and museum walls. To modern Central Asians, she is more than a historical figure, she is the mother of nations. A living bridge to the days before Islam, before Soviet rule. A reminder that their identity was not born of submission, but of resistance. Of courage. Of thunder beneath hooves. In a world still splintered by inequality, divided by gender, power, memory, Tomiris remains a beacon. Not simply because she struck down a king, but because she taught us something deeper, that dignity is not something granted. It must be taken. Sometimes, it looks like a mother in mourning, staring into the eyes of her enemy, and refusing to let him leave alive. We ask why some names fade while others endure. Tomiris endures because she burned too brightly to forget. In an age where women were meant to vanish behind veils, behind walls, behind men, she rose, blade drawn, grief burning, and carved her legend into the bones of history. Empires fall. Statues crumble. But legends ride. And somewhere, beneath the endless sky, where the steppe still breathes, there gallops a queen. Unbroken. Unyielding. And utterly unforgettable. In ancient Egypt, beekeeping was more than a rustic pastime, it was a divine science, state-sanctioned and blessed by the gods. Long before the invention of modern apiaries, The Egyptians had already engineered a systematic, mobile system for honey production that bordered on the miraculous. As early as 2400 BC, vivid murals on the tombs of Saqqara captured scenes of beekeepers at work, surrounded by the golden hum of their sacred task. But this wasn't just agriculture. It was religion, medicine, magic, and legacy rolled into one. They used rows of horizontal clay hives, primitive, yes, but sophisticated. These weren't wooden boxes. They looked like earthen tubes, similar to terracotta pipes, laid sideways and stacked with care. They were built to move. They had to. As the Nile receded, and fields bloomed along the riverbanks, these hives were transported seasonally, tracing the nectar flow like ancient beekeeping cartographers. It was transhumance at its finest, thousands of years before anyone coined the term. Think of it as GPS for bees, guided not by satellites, but by sun, instinct, and river song. When it came time to harvest the honey, beekeepers didn't wear protective gear. There were no netted hoods or padded suits. Only knowledge, timing, and nerves of steel. They used pipes of clay or stone to blow smoke gently into the hives, calming the bees before extraction. A sacred ritual done with quiet precision. To the Egyptians, honey wasn't just food. It was an offering to gods. A healer of wounds. A companion in the afterlife. It was bottled sunlight, and every drop was earned. And so, deep in the necropolises of stone and sand, in painted tombs glowing with ochre and blue, the beekeepers still work. Still tending hives, still guiding bees. Immortalized by hand and pigment, testament to an ancient truth. Even the smallest creatures can build empires of gold. Honeycombs were removed with reverence, not just for their sweetness, but for their power. Honey in ancient Egypt was more than food, it was medicine, preservative, offering, and omen. It played a role in healing wounds, embalming the dead, and sealing sacred rites. To the Egyptians, it was not a simple substance. It was divine. Honey was believed to be a gift from the gods, especially Are, the radiant deity of the sun. According to myth, when Are wept, his tears fell to earth and became bees. This wasn't just poetic mythology. It shaped how Egyptians viewed beekeeping. Bees were considered messengers between mortals and the heavens. In temples, honey was placed beside sacred idols. It was poured into offerings, burned in rituals, and even traded like currency. It became part of the state, part of the soul. Medical papyri list honey in over 500 remedies, mixed with herbs, wine, or milk to soothe burns, cure infections, or calm the gut. Though the Egyptians couldn't explain antibacterial properties in modern terms, they saw the effects. They knew it worked. Beeswax too had value beyond the hive. It was molded into cosmetics, used in the embalming process, and even carved into writing tablets for scribes. The hive, in Egyptian culture, wasn't just a source of nourishment, it was a symbol of harmony, healing, and cosmic design. Carefully cultivated, closely guarded, and revered under the eyes of both humans and gods. If Egypt gave beekeeping its sanctity, Mesopotamia gave it structure, legal and administrative. The cradle of civilization didn't just invent writing and irrigation, it understood that even honey required laws. Though their beekeeping wasn't etched into colorful tombs, traces survive in cuneiform tablets and royal edicts, evidence of a quietly advanced system. Mentions of honey appear as early as the Sumerian period, continuing through Akkadian and Babylonian records. In these texts, we find references to needs, bee gardens or apiaries, usually attached to temples or royal estates. Honey wasn't for everyone. It was elite, protected, and powerful. It was used in religious ceremonies, offered to gods, consumed for healing, and traded like any precious commodity. Losing a hive wasn't a minor setback, it could mean a major economic blow. The most striking insight comes from the Code of Hammurabi, written around 1754 BC. Known for its famous laws on justice, theft, and agriculture, it also includes lines about beekeeping. If a person's bees swarmed and caused damage to another's crops, they were responsible. If honey was stolen, compensation had to be made, sometimes in silver, sometimes in replacement jars. In a society where most things were measured in grain, honey earning its own category in legal codes speaks volumes. Even beyond economics, bees held spiritual meaning. Certain texts describe them as divine messengers, often associated with Ninurta, god of both agriculture and war. Beeswax held special ritual value. It was used to seal documents, form figurines, and craft tools for religious rites. It straddled both practicality and mystery, used in courtrooms and altars alike. While the exact design of Mesopotamian hives has been lost to time, scholars believe they used structures made of mud brick or woven baskets, similar to what early Levantine cultures employed. Though less visible than Egypt's painted murals, Mesopotamia's bees still hummed through law, myth, medicine, and ritual, a quiet empire of wings and wax woven into the heart of civilization. These hives would have rested in shaded gardens or on rooftops, carefully sheltered from the scorching heat of summer. In Mesopotamia, beekeeping wasn't a sacred rite, it was civil engineering. A way to manage resources, enforce fairness, and maintain the delicate balance of an economy where even a single bee sting could trigger a lawsuit. To the Mesopotamians, the hive was more than a marvel of nature. It was a model of law, order, and the logic of civilization, a humming symbol of structured harmony. Further north, in the craggy highlands of Anatolia, long before the Greeks took their philosophical spotlight, the Hittites were quietly perfecting the art of beekeeping. But for them, bees were never just insects. They were sacred emissaries, pure messengers that flew between human hearts and divine will. Where Egypt treated bees as economic allies, and Mesopotamia saw them as civil stewards, the Hittites viewed bees through a ritualistic lens. In religious texts dating to the 14th and 13th centuries BC, bees weren't just producers of honey, they were called into ceremonies. One ancient ritual describes how a bee was summoned to carry away evil, impurity, and divine wrath. And crucially, it wasn't sacrificed. It was released. A rare gesture of mercy in an era when most rites ended in blood, underscoring the reverence the Hittites held for this tiny creature. To them, honey had more than flavor. It held power. Used in libations, sacrifices, and sacred anointings, honey was often blended with milk, wine, or grain. It wasn't simply eaten, it was offered burned blessed. It became the bridge between human intentions and divine response. Archaeological traces suggest the Hittites likely used clay or woven hives, stacked in enclosures close to temples or palaces. Though hard evidence is sparse, comparisons with neighboring Levantine and Syrian practices point to portable, tubular hives crafted from straw and clay, similar in form to Egypt's, but imbued with a spiritual function. In many cases, these beekeepers worked under temple authority. Their role wasn't just agricultural, it was ceremonial. Honey became a tool of diplomacy, healing, and sacred renewal. The bee, small, fragile, unassuming, carried symbolic weight far beyond its size. And the Hittites added something remarkable to the global knowledge of bees, a recognition of migration. Surviving records note how bee swarms moved with seasonal blooms, a clear sign that these ancient people were closely attuned to ecological rhythms. In Anatolia, the hive didn't buzz in the background. It resonated like a sacred tone, echoing through the fields, the festivals, and the bones of gods and kings alike. When the Greeks entered the conversation, they didn't just study bees. They elevated them. To the Greeks, the hive wasn't just a nest, it was philosophy in motion. A living metaphor for the ideal city-state, ordered, communal, tireless. Bees were both feared and revered, their mysterious discipline inspiring wonder and imitation. Greek beekeeping advanced the craft from ritual to science. While earlier civilizations relied on stationary clay hives, the Greeks innovated with terracotta hives featuring removable lids and compartments, allowing beekeepers to harvest honey without destroying the colony. An early step towards sustainability, and a practical revolution. They also refined the use of smoke. Employing ceramic bellows and clay pots, they could gently lull bees into calm, making honey collection far less dangerous and much more efficient. The result? Stronger colonies, more frequent harvests, and fewer stings. Among the most curious of all was Aristotle. He didn't just marvel at bees, he studied them. Closely. Patiently. He documented hive behavior with meticulous care, setting the foundation for centuries of entomological study. In his Historia Animalium, Aristotle observed the beehive with fascination. He noted how bees seemed to have designated roles, some gathered nectar, others guarded the hive, and one, whom he called the king bee, appeared to lead them all. Though he missed the mark on the leader's gender, his insights laid the foundation for centuries of bee study. To the Greeks, honey was more than a sweetener, it was sacred. It flavored wines, preserved fruit, enriched cakes, and soothed wounds. Medicinal salves often began with honey, its healing properties trusted long before their chemistry was understood. In mythology, honey was divine. The Greeks believed ambrosia, the food of the gods, was a blend of honey and wine, a celestial nectar. The bee itself was linked to goddesses like Artemis, protector of the wild, and Demeter, guardian of the harvest. Priestesses of Artemis were even known as Melissa, the Greek word for bees. To them, the bee wasn't just an insect. It was a feminine force, sacred and powerful. The hive became both a scientific marvel and a spiritual emblem, an organized microcosm that moved with purpose, unity, and grace. To study bees was, in the Greek imagination, to study nature's very laws, and perhaps glimpse the intentions of the gods. While the Greeks revered bees in myth and medicine, the Romans harnessed them with ambition. Beekeeping in the Roman world wasn't a backyard task, it was scaled for an empire. From Gaul's rolling vineyards to the olive-covered hills of Hispania, the Romans built a network of beekeepers to supply the demands of a vast population. Rome inherited its apicultural wisdom from the Greeks and the Etruscans, but elevated it into a refined science. Agricultural writers like Varro and Columella documented everything: how to build hives, relocate swarms, collect honey, and protect colonies. Their manuals read with startling modernity, covering swarm patterns, seasonal shifts, and how to manage pests. Roman hives came in many forms: hollow logs, corkwood vessels, terracotta tubes, and baskets woven tight and sealed with dung or clay. Adaptability was essential. In colder provinces, hives were insulated. In hotter regions, ventilation was critical. This flexibility allowed Rome to carry the art of beekeeping across every climate in its domain. To calm the bees, Romans burned herbs like thyme or oregano inside clay pots. The smoke pacified the hive and possibly flavored the honey itself. Harvesting was a methodical act, using iron knives to cut the comb, separating wax through heat and filtration. That wax was prized. It became candles, waterproofing for boats, cosmetics, and writing tablets for scribes. It was as functional as it was sacred. Honey itself saturated Roman life. It sweetened wines into mulsum, enriched baked goods, and was used in sauces for meats and fish. Soldiers and athletes consumed it for strength. It was their natural energy booster. Doctors, following Hippocratic ideals, prescribed honey for sore throats, wounds, fevers, and digestive woes. Its healing qualities were well known, even if the science was still mystical. But what truly defined Roman beekeeping was its organization. It wasn't just an agricultural practice, it was a system, a supply chain, a machine built to nourish an empire. Honey wasn't merely a luxury. It was infrastructure. In the grand estates of the Roman elite, honey production wasn't a quaint pastime, it was an enterprise. Large villas often operated fully functional honey farms, maintained by enslaved labor and overseen by estate stewards. Everything was accounted for. Honey yields were logged in ledgers. Surpluses weren't wasted, they were sold in bustling markets or shipped to far-flung corners of the empire. To Roman eyes, bees weren't just buzzing insects. They were tiny workers, model citizens of an economy that prized order and productivity. A successful hive reflected the ideal Roman household, structured, obedient, and endlessly fruitful. And while ancient cultures certainly valued bees for honey and wax, many went far beyond the material. They saw the hive as sacred space, a living bridge between the natural and the divine. In Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, and beyond, the bee was never just a creature, it was a symbol of mystery, power, and prophecy. In Egyptian cosmology, bees were born from divinity. One myth claimed that Ra, the sun god, wept tears that fell to the earth and became bees. Honey wasn't just food, it was a holy offering, used in temples to honor gods and placed in tombs to escort the dead into the afterlife. Even the pharaohs adopted the bee as royal iconography. Rulers of Lower Egypt bore the title he of the sedge and the bee, tying their authority directly to the hive's sacred harmony. In Greece, the bee held potent feminine energy. Priestesses of Artemis and Demeter, goddesses of fertility and wilderness, were known as Melissae or bees. These women were revered as oracles and intermediaries between gods and mortals. The Oracle of Delphi itself, one of the most powerful religious institutions in the ancient world, was said by some to have once been governed by bee priestesses. Even Pythia, the famed Delphic seer, was sometimes called the Delphic bee. To the Greeks, the hive wasn't just nature's marvel, it was a philosophical model. Bees lived in perfect order, cooperative, tireless, devout. Philosophers like the Stoics saw in them the ideal society, each individual acting for the good of the whole. Early Christians later took up the symbol too. Bees became icons of chastity, of resurrection, creatures that labored, created, and nourished without indulgence. Elsewhere, in the magical traditions of Mesopotamia, bees were woven into rituals of cleansing and purification. In certain Hittite ceremonies, a living bee was sent into the world to carry away impurity and divine wrath, released, not killed, as if entrusted with the weight of a people's sins. Honey and wax were burned in sacred fires, used to craft amulets, and inscribed in spell texts meant to bless, protect, and heal. The bee, in these cultures, wasn't just miraculous. It was mystical. It lived in places hidden to humans, created gold without cruelty, and only stung when provoked. Its gifts, honey, wax, order, were seen as divine blessings. And above all, honey wasn't just sweet. It was sacred. Even without knowing what bacteria were, ancient healers instinctively understood honey's power. It cleaned wounds. It soothed throats. It preserved bodies. It wasn't magic, though it felt like it. It was science, centuries ahead of its time. Egyptian medicine, some of the oldest recorded, leaned heavily on honey. The Ebers Papyrus, dating to around 1550 BC, lists honey in more than 500 treatments. Mixed with milk, figs, garlic, or herbs, it was used to treat everything from eye infections to digestive issues. Combined with fat or resin, it became a healing salve for cuts and burns. Healers knew that wounds treated with honey closed faster and resisted rot, thanks to its natural acidity and hydrogen peroxide content. The Greeks embraced these discoveries, carrying them across the Mediterranean. Hippocrates, often called the father of modern medicine, didn't just see honey as a treat, he saw it as a tool. He prescribed it for respiratory ailments, ulcers, and exhaustion. Mixed with vinegar, he created oxymel, a sharp tonic meant to break up phlegm and bring down fevers. Greek athletes swore by honeyed water, drinking it during Olympic training to build endurance, convinced it restored strength faster than wine or plain water. Far to the east, in India, honey, madhu, was held in equal reverence. The Ayurvedic system classified it not just by taste or texture, but by its origin and healing potential. Ancient texts warned against heating honey too much, yet endorsed its use for a long list of ailments: indigestion, coughs, wounds, even as an antidote to poisons. It wasn't just medicine, it was sacred. Honey was offered to the gods, consumed during fasts, and seen as a purifier for both the body and soul. The Romans, as always, took what others revered and refined it with precision. Pliny the Elder listed dozens of honey-based cures in his Natural History. It was blended into ointments, swirled into gargles, added to laxatives, and used liberally on battlefield wounds. Combined with poppy juice, it served as a sedative. Roman surgeons kept it close at hand to reduce swelling and dress injuries. Beeswax, too, had its place, used in plasters, balms, and even dental work. Its softness, its resistance to decay, it was the perfect sealant. In short, honey in the ancient world wasn't just sweet. It was survival. It soothed the sick, preserved the dead, and represented a purity few other substances could match. It was, quite literally, divine medicine delivered on the wings of bees. Beekeepers of the ancient world were more than simple farmers. They were experimenters, engineers, and attentive students of the natural world. Across continents and cultures, they developed tools and techniques to manage hives, harvest with care, and even defend themselves from the inevitable sting. One of the most important innovations was the hive itself. The Egyptians pioneered the use of long, horizontal clay cylinders, like giant terracotta scrolls stacked in rows. Durable and portable, these hives mimicked the crevices where wild bees thrived. The Greeks and Romans took the concept further, crafting basket and ceramic hives, often with removable lids that allowed beekeepers to extract honey without destroying the colony. That was revolutionary. No longer did gathering honey mean the death of the hive. It marked the beginning of sustainable agriculture. To access the combs without inciting chaos, ancient apiarists used smoke. The Greeks built clay smokers and bellows to funnel gentle clouds into the hive. The smoke confused the bees' alarm signals, keeping them calm. The Romans refined the technique by burning fragrant herbs, thyme, oregano, lavender. The scent soothed the bees, and maybe, just maybe, flavored the honey. Harvesting required precision. Wooden or bronze knives were used to slice the combs clean. Some beekeepers pressed the combs to release honey, others melted and strained the wax for reuse. Beeswax found its way into candles, cosmetics, waterproofing, and writing tablets. As for protection, there were no suits, no veils. Ancient beekeepers relied on experience, timing, and a steady hand. Getting stung was part of the job, avoiding it was a skill. Texts from the period revealed just how deeply they observed the hive. They tracked swarm behavior, knew when seasons would shift pollen flows, and even moved hives from place to follow the bloom of flowers. What they practiced wasn't just farming. It was an early science, rooted in patience, pattern, and the quiet hum of thousands of tiny wings working in perfect, golden rhythm. In many ancient cultures, beekeeping wasn't static, it moved with the seasons. Some practiced an early form of what we now call migratory beekeeping, relocating hives to follow the blooming of flowers. This method, known as transhumance, ensured the bees always had access to fresh nectar and reflected a deep understanding of ecological cycles. Storage was just as important as movement. Honey had to be preserved with care. In Egypt, It was sealed inside ceramic jars, designed to keep moisture out and preserve its purity. Some of this honey, buried in tombs for millennia, was still edible when rediscovered, its longevity an ancient marvel. But maintaining a hive wasn't only about tools and timing. It was also about ritual. Across the ancient world, ceremonies were held to honor the spirit of the bees or to seek favor from gods believed to guard their hives. This spiritual connection was considered just as essential as the smoke pots and clay jars. If you angered the bees, or the divine forces behind them, you risked more than a few stings. You risked misfortune. In the end, ancient beekeeping was never just agriculture. It was a fusion of craftsmanship, natural science, and reverence. A sacred balance of human ingenuity and ecological respect. From the floodplains of the Nile to the rocky hills of Anatolia, from Greek sanctuaries to Roman estates, beekeepers crafted sustainable systems. They designed movable hives, refined smoke control, and timed harvests to protect colonies while still collecting the golden yield. These were not random efforts. They were part of a carefully observed model of sustainability, one in which bees and humans thrived together. Their respect for the rhythms of the hive helped nurture a broader philosophy, that human life should exist in harmony with nature, not at its expense. Their insights into honey's medicinal properties, particularly its antibacterial and preservative powers, shaped some of the earliest known medical practices. From Egypt's papyri to India's Ayurvedic texts to Roman physician manuals, honey was treated as a universal healer. Mixed with herbs, fats, and wine, it became a salve, a tonic, and a cure. And beeswax? It molded more than candles. It was foundational in cosmetics, art, even early construction. But beyond the physical uses, the bee held a powerful place in the human imagination. Spiritual traditions across the world wove bees into their sacred rituals. Honey was offered to gods. Bees were messengers between the mortal and the divine. Some cultures saw them as symbols of resurrection or rebirth. Others believed they carried the prayers of the people on their wings. These beliefs haven't vanished. To this day, rituals that honor bees and honey survive, in folk festivals, sacred rites, and symbolic art. The hive still represents order, unity, and divine purpose. Even the ancient method of migratory beekeeping echoes today in modern agriculture. Commercial pollination, now essential for global food production, depends on moving hives from field to field, just as our ancestors did thousands of years ago. The wisdom of those ancient keepers has grown more relevant than ever. As modern ecosystems falter and pollinators vanish, their work reminds us that bees are not just background players. They're partners. Vital, vulnerable, and irreplaceable. Despite all our advances, despite the machines, the data, the synthetic tools, the relationship remains the same. Humans still depend on bees. And bees, in a way, have shaped the story of humanity. They've fed us, healed us, inspired us. From the first time we followed their hum into the trees, to the jars buried with pharaohs, to the hives humming beside glass skyscrapers today. The legacy of ancient beekeeping stands as proof of what's possible when we observe the world with curiosity, act with care, and work in quiet collaboration with the smallest of creatures. A legacy that still buzzes, alive, sacred, and shared.